So if you're dealing with acid reflux, I'm going to go over some studies here that show us that supplementing with melatonin may have the ability to improve those acid reflux symptoms for some people. I'm also going to show you some major mistakes that people make doing this, some of the trouble that those mistakes can cause, and ways that you can use this to benefit your reflux, along with fixing the actual underlying cause of the problem. So I've talked in other videos about why I don't use melatonin to improve sleep. And I used to feel like, well, when you put the melatonin in, it kind of reduces the amount that the body makes, so they might sleep better initially, but then not so much. But I've since found some studies that show that the body is really not reducing the level of melatonin that it produces while you're supplementing with it. But I still don't use this for sleep. I still prefer to fix the actual underlying causes that are causing the insomnia issues, and I'll link that video in the description below if you need to check that out. But when we're looking at the acid reflux situation, we really need to understand its effects on the LES, or the lower esophageal sphincter, which is basically this little valve that opens up so food can come in, and then it's supposed to close so while the food's acidifying, it doesn't come back up and burn us. But to understand melatonin's effects on this acid reflux situation, we first need to understand the actual underlying causes of acid reflux. It's not really caused by too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. The most common underlying causes that we see are either hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid, an overgrowth of bacteria either in the stomach or the small intestine, or some type of hiatal hernia that is restricting this LES from functioning correctly. So we need to understand that this LES valve that closes so acid doesn't come back up is actually triggered by stomach acid. We'll go over some studies that show this in just a minute, but if somebody's just making a small amount of stomach acid, which is very common for a wide variety of reasons, then it's not enough to trigger that LES to tighten up and close. And then that small amount of acid comes back up and burns them, and they're like, oh man, I got too much acid. I should turn that off. And when they turn the acid off completely, then they don't feel that symptom. But they haven't actually fixed the problem, and they have the ability to create other problems that we'll talk about in just a second. So when there's an overgrowth of bacteria here that's putting out all these gases, those gases create pressure, and then that pressure pushes things back up, and it might restrict that LES from closing correctly because of all that pressure. And then a hiatal hernia can kind of pull the stomach back up, and then that LES is kind of jacked up and it won't close correctly. We have videos on all those topics. I'm not going to dig into all that right here, but I just want to make sure that you understand what's actually creating reflux for most people. So when we're looking at this melatonin situation, this study here on the potential therapeutic effects of melatonin in gastroesophageal reflux disease did a study where they took some control groups, and then they took some people that were just using melatonin, and then they took some people that were just using a PPI, or a proton pump inhibitor that turns off that stomach acid production. And then they had a group that was using both the melatonin and the PPI. And I think at night they were using like 3 milligrams of the melatonin. And they found that the people that were using the PPIs and the melatonin together saw the best results. And they're like, wow, we should really look into this melatonin thing. But they found that people that were using only melatonin to fix the acid reflux didn't have as good of results. So what we want to understand when we're looking at this combination of using these two together is that the PPI is turning off acid, but the melatonin also seems to have the ability to tighten up that LES valve. So what's important to understand is that it's not the contact of melatonin with that LES that's triggering it to tighten and close. There are deeper effects going on. So what this study helped us understand is that the melatonin also has the ability to turn off stomach acid. When stomach acid is not being produced in the stomach, the body will raise a hormone called gastrin. Whenever the stomach becomes more alkaline, gastrin goes up and it tells the body to make this hydrochloric acid, or HCl, that helps us acidify our stomach. But when the gastrin goes high and it doesn't have the ability to produce that stomach acid for any type of reason, then that gastrin going high has the ability to tighten that LES valve. So the melatonin is actually raising the gastrin level, and that is what's triggering that LES valve to close and helping that reflux symptom to go down. So when we look at this study here on action of gastrin on the lower esophageal sphincter in man, It says both hog gastrin and synthetic gastrin stimulate the cardiac sphincter, which is actually that LES valve, is also called the cardiac sphincter, to increase tone and augment the resistance to reflux. Endogenous gastrin has a similar effect, and gastrin also stimulates the secretion of acid, which has also been found to increase the resistance of the sphincter. But the effect of gastrin appears to be independent of the secretory stimulus. So they're saying that both of those things have the ability to tighten that LES valve, either gastrin going high or the stomach acid going higher like it's supposed to anytime we eat food. But when I saw that the mechanism that was helping the melatonin reduce the reflux was that it was raising gastrin, I was like, well, that's going to be a problem for SIBO. I'll put a link in the description below for our video on the secret cause of your SIBO, and it explains that when gastrin goes high, like if somebody uses a PPI to turn off stomach acid, that causes gastrin to go high all the time. And gastrin's other job is to signal this ileocecal valve down here that separates the small intestine from the large intestine. It signals that to open up so that food can move through, but if it's signaling that to open up all the time, it leaves the door open, and then bacteria from the large intestine go back into the small intestine where they're not supposed to be, and they set up camp and create that SIBO issue, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can create a lot of symptoms and trouble. But I found in this study that a lot of people feel like this melatonin also has the ability to trigger this ileocecal valve to close. So they feel like this is not creating that trouble. I don't know for sure that it's not. I'm still a little bit skeptical about that, but that seems to be not as problematic as I was initially thinking. But we've talked in a lot of videos, like if somebody turns off HCl or their body just doesn't have the ability to make it, that leaves this front door open where bad guys come in on the food, so now you have SIBO coming from both directions. And remember that pressure has the ability to increase reflux issues for a lot of people. Now, let's go a step further and let's look at this study here on mechanics of esophageal muscle contraction, evidence of an inotropic effect of gastrin. And they're talking about how that gastrin can go high and cause that LES valve to tighten and close. But I'm going to put a link to another study below that shows us that extended PPI use that turns off stomach acid for an extended period of time had the ability to loosen that LES valve. So this study helps us understand that calcium's role is very important for that sphincter to be able to be tight and tone and close to keep the acid from coming back up. The body needs calcium to do that. Now the problem is, I've gone over a lot of studies that help us understand that in order for the body to pull minerals out of the food that we're consuming, we need stomach acid to break that food down correctly and access those minerals. And when we lose that stomach acid, whether we're using a PPI or just maybe we're too stressed for our body to be able to make stomach acid, there's a lot of reasons that a person might not be making enough stomach acid. They don't need to be on a PPI. But when that's the case, we don't have the ability to access all the minerals in the food that we're consuming, and then this calcium will go low, and then that can't tighten up the way that it's supposed to. Calcium in those tissues and other minerals are very important for them to be able to contract and relax and tighten the way that they're supposed to. So that helps us understand why the long-term PPI use could reduce the tone of that LES valve. And the other thing that this first study we talked about found was that most of the people that were dealing with acid reflux also showed low melatonin levels. Well, we can understand why that happens when we look at how the body works, because the body needs serotonin to make melatonin. And to make serotonin, the body needs tryptophan, which is an amino acid. And to get access to these amino acids from the proteins that we eat, we need hydrochloric acid in the stomach to acidify those proteins so that we can break those down and access amino acids like this tryptophan. So if we can't access tryptophan, we're not going to be able to make serotonin or melatonin, and the melatonin will go low. So this is another reason why we don't turn off stomach acid when we're trying to fix an acid reflux symptom. We want to fix the actual underlying cause so that we can close that valve the way that it's supposed to close, but we can also digest our food and get the nutrients out of the food that we're supposed to have. Now, keep in mind that if your doctor's telling you to use a PPI, I'm not telling you not to use that just because I'm sharing these studies that show troubles that they can create. Remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving anybody medical advice. I'm basically a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author. Because when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't figure that out, I had to dig for my own answers. So now for 20 years, I've been teaching health professionals in more than 40 countries how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. But remember, these studies are going to be below, so you can dig through those and figure out the right questions to ask your doctor. So when we're looking for a solution to fixing this reflux problem, if a person has a hernia, they really need to fix that. We'll have a link in the description below on our video on how I fixed my hiatal hernia. If somebody has an overgrowth, they need to reduce that overgrowth. But if stomach acid is low, a person can supplement with betaine HCl capsules to synthesize that acidic stomach and allow it to work correctly and digest the food and trigger that LES valve to close correctly. We'll have a link in the description below for this study on mealtime supplementation with betaine HCl for functional hypochlorhydria. They showed that people can improve these low stomach acid symptoms by just supplementing with betaine HCl. But if someone wanted to use HCl during the day to acidify their food properly, and then if they were still having trouble at night, maybe they were just having some reflux at night, they could supplement with this melatonin at night. And in this study, most people use like 3 milligrams, seemed to be good enough. And the under the tongue liquid type seemed to work a little bit better just because it got into the bloodstream a little bit faster. And then you could help reduce that reflux at night, but then by the morning, the life of that melatonin would have worn down and your body could go back to making stomach acid for breakfast. So you're not really turning off stomach acid all day like you do with a lot of medications. You're just using that method that reduces the stomach acid at night, but also helps trigger that LES valve to close and reduce that symptom until you can fix enough of these underlying causes to reduce that reflux at night too. So the timing of when you do that and the type of the melatonin that you use could be very important when it comes to that. We really seems like the liquid type that kind of goes into the tongue and absorbs that way works a little bit better. You also wouldn't want to use a time release type melatonin because then that's going to extend the life of that into the next day and restrict your ability to make hydrochloric acid to digest your breakfast correctly. And you wouldn't want to use this all day long because again, you're turning off this stomach acid all day long and reducing your body's ability to access that calcium that's going to be important for that LES valve to close correctly. Now what you don't want to do is just supplement with HCl without really knowing what you're doing because you can create an increase in symptoms. If you increase the acid here, but it's not yet enough acid to trigger that valve to close, well then you've got a lot more acid going back up. You're going to increase a lot of those symptoms, so you want to know how to use it correctly. So I hope this video helps you understand how melatonin can have a role in reducing some symptoms temporarily until you fix things. But if you think you might want to check out supplementing with betaine HCl to acidify the stomach correctly, you can jump over right now and check out our video on 9 major betaine HCl mistakes that you want to avoid. I can't wait to hear about your results.